Sapio File. Noun. One who is attracted to intelligence. Join us, fellow fun-loving lover of knowledge, as we dig into your favorite topics with our very own nerdy diatribes, words of wisdom, and takes on life as millennials. Welcome to the Sapio Files. All right, everybody, welcome back. And this week, we have a really fun topic. We're talking about diversity in movies. And we see a lot of diversity on TV, but movies seem to lag a little bit behind. And there's a few ways that people have come up with to determine how diverse or inclusive a movie is. So we thought it'd be fun to talk about those today. And the first one, the most famous one, is called the Bechdel Test. And the Bechdel Test is a test for movies to determine if they include enough female characters and are representative of females, because oftentimes movies are biased towards the male, which is sort of, I'm not sure if that's because that was the industry for a while or just how a lot of stories are written. It's another thing, I'd noticed even in theater that you have a million girls who are all trying out to be like the third tree on the right, and then the teacher has to like stalk down some guy who doesn't know anything about theater to be the male lead. This is just how it is, because there's not enough guys who do it and there's too many women, but the parts are always skewed the opposite way. There's always like 10 guy parts and like 2 girls. So a lot of times this happens in movies as well. So the Bechdel test helps us figure out if the movies include them. It was named for cartoonist Alison Bechdel, and it was in conjunction with Liz Wallace. She credited her friend Liz Wallace for coming up with it. And it was in a 1985 cartoon strip called Dykes to Watch Out For, which is, kind of funny. It was basically lesbian jokes in a comic strip. And there was a comic strip where the characters talk about this and they're like, yeah, I only watch movies if it has this amount of women in it or whatever. So what those characters said then got turned into an assessment to determine the inclusion of female characters. So for a movie to pass the Bechdel test, it needs to have 2 named women, they need to speak to each other, and they need to speak about something that is not a man. It could be anything, though. It could be the silliest thing. It could be like, oh, so my mascara is this color and your mascara is this color. That could be the extent of their conversation. It would still pass. So it doesn't necessarily mean quality female characters. And actually, because of how some things are put together, there are some movies with quality female characters that don't pass. So it's not a perfect measure, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And that seems like a very low bar, but surprisingly, a lot of movies don't pass.
So yes, I'm here too.
Hi.
I told Chelsea to do the introduction but basically I was so excited to make a list of my favorite movies and see if they passed or didn't pass, and then determine whether or not I thought it mattered at the end of the day, based on, what movies I liked and everything, that I forgot to look up who Bechdel was. So now I'm very glad that Chelsea has informed all of you, but also me, because I Bechdel test all my movies, and that's what I was doing. So.
Cool. What'd you find out about your favorite movies?
So I made a pretty lengthy list. I'll just give you a rundown of things that clearly pass. The Sound of Music, the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, Fried Green Tomatoes, Stardust, Princess Diaries, The Book Thief, Silver Linings Playbook, Elizabethtown, Cold Mountain, It's a Wonderful Life, Anne of Green Gables, Little Woman, Pride and Prejudice, Anastasia, Letters to Juliet. Those are the ones that passed.
Okay.
The Lord of the Rings doesn't pass.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that too.
The Star Wars trilogy, the original trilogy, doesn't pass. Mm-hmm. Favorites. To Kill a Mockingbird barely passes. I didn't even count it. The Harry Potter films, a lot of them don't end up passing.
Some do, some don't, yeah.
Some do, some don't, depending on who's represented in a particular film, especially since they split the 7th one in 2. What else do I have down here? Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves passes. Yeah, Kevin Costner. Yeah, that's what I wrote down.
Cool.
As far as, but those were just things that I just thought of as I was going. But interestingly enough, you touched upon this, Chelsea. I was talking with my Aunt Lynn. She shows up a lot in this podcast, even though she's not in it.
She's really like our invisible host.
Yeah. I was talking with my Aunt Lynn, and she was saying that, you know, are we really going to use this one test to determine whether or not a film has value? And I said, absolutely not.
Yeah, totally not. It's just a test.
It's just an interesting test to see.
Yeah. I love a lot of movies.
Females, not about males, are prevalent in films that we enjoy.
Right. I love a lot of movies that don't pass. It's not saying it's a bad movie if it doesn't. It's just how representative are the female characters. So I made a list of surprise fails and surprise passes.
Okay.
So surprise fails are like classics that, or like very famous. They don't have to necessarily be like official classics, but famous movies. I was going to say bestsellers, but they're not books. Box office hits.
Okay.
That fail. Social Network. There's really no women that are not somebody's girlfriend. And they're all just there as the girlfriend, and they only talk to the guys, or if they talk to each other, it's about their guys. Like you said with Harry Potter, Deathly Hallows Part 2 does not pass. People want to argue a lot that Molly Weasley has her famous line to Bellatrix, but Bellatrix never says anything back to her, so it doesn't count as a conversation.
Okay.
So they're like, no, Molly talks to Bellatrix, and like she says something at her.
Yeah.
So that's why Deathly Hallows Part 2 does not talk. However, Harry Potter has some very strong female characters. They may not all be in every movie talking to each other. They may be talking to the guys, but it does have some strong characters. Avatar.
Yeah. What? I have a point to make after. Just remind me Harry Potter female characters, and I'll go off of it. So,
okay.
Continue.
All right. Avatar does not pass, even though it has a strong female character. The only woman she talks to is her mom, and it's about a guy. All three original Star Wars, which are amazing, like you said, do not pass, but Leia is really the only girl who has any personality in that, and she only talks to guys. Run, Lola, Run does not pass. Casablanca does not pass. Breakfast at Tiffany's does not pass. Godfather, Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I love Raiders of the Lost
Ark. It's a great movie, but it doesn't pass. Princess Bride doesn't pass. Toy Story.
Oh my god.
The first Toy Story doesn't pass. None of the girl toys talk to other girl toys. It's mostly boy toys.
Boy toys.
But like Barbie only talks to the like Woody and stuff. There aren't any other girls.
Potato Head only talks to Mr. Potato Head, really.
Yeah, so the girl toys don't talk to each other in the first one. They do in the sequels. Lion King. There's really only Nala, and she really only talks to Simba.
And Sarabi only talks to Mufasa and Simba.
Yeah, and then a couple really surprising ones because they're about like powerhouse, loud, outspoken women. Lara Croft, Tomb Raider does not pass. The Blind Side does not pass.
Oh.
Because every time she talks to a woman, it's about her son.
Right.
And The Hurt Locker, which was the first movie for a female to win the Oscar for Best Director, does not pass. So those are the surprise fails. Now, that doesn't mean they're not great movies. I put them as surprise fails because they're great.
See, yeah, on that point with Harry Potter and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars, a lot of those films included women in roles that they weren't ever in before, adventurers and, dynamic protagonists. So I almost want to reject or modify the Bechdel test to include women who talk to men as long as it's not about another man or about a romantic relationship, because a lot of that happens.
Right. It's not very accurate.
No.
I just realized I left off one from that list. That's a huge one that was in my research.
Lord of the Rings?
Yes, which has 3 powerhouse women who are all amazing, and they're not talking about their boyfriends.
No.
But they don't know each other.
They never meet.
So, because they only talk to men, they're total badasses, but they don't talk to each other, it doesn't pass.
Right, because Eowyn has her entire scene where she goes after the Witch King.
I am no man.
Yeah, and then, of course, Galadriel is like this phenomenally powerful magic person that rejects the ring, even though she knows that she could be all powerful. It's like, come on. Like,
yeah, they are powerhouse women. They just don't know each other.
Right.
So it can't pass because they don't know each other. All right, then I did surprise passes, which are movies that seem like they are like sexist or offensive, or like even the title sounds like all we do is talk about men.
Right.
That do pass.
All right.
Okay. Zootopia.
Okay.
Bad Moms. Weird Science. American Pie.
Yeah.
Stepford Wives. Anchorman. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And How to Marry a Millionaire. Do pass.
Excellent.
And the last two, like, those sound like we're just going to talk about guys.
Well,
but they don't just talk about guys. They talk about guys sometimes, but they talk about other stuff too.
Yeah, I looked up and I just, because I was curious, I was like, I wonder, so listeners, one of my guilty pleasures is that I've seen like every single one of the American Pie films. So I looked it up right away and I was like, yeah, American Pie. Way to be wildly inappropriate, but also pass this test.
Yeah. Those are my surprise pass lists.
The House Bunny.
House Bunny. Yes, House Bunny. I didn't think about all of them. I was like looking up ones online that passed. So I could probably go through more and find more.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah. So that is the Bechdel test. Do you have any more?
No, I was just
thoughts.
The same thing that I talked about, the conversation that Aunt Lynn and I had, and things that I've been reflecting upon as you were. It's just, with any test, even when we were doing our personality tests and everything, like there's always something that is slightly wrong with it, where you can't use it just solely as I'm going to watch only films that are a part of.
Oh, totally not.
We're going to lose so many great films that also have really strong female characters.
They do. I don't think it's the most accurate measure, as shown by some of those films that do and don't pass.
American
Pie. Anchorman. But it's something to think about, and why that seems like a very low bar. Why aren't more movies passing? It's just interesting to think about.
Yeah, very, very true.
What did you want to say about Harry Potter characters?
Oh, no, just the same thing that I was saying about, the Lord of the Rings characters, the Star Wars characters, that for those of you that don't know or who are starting this podcast now and didn't hear me mention it before, but I wrote my master's thesis on feminist theory and Harry Potter. And how Harry Potter's female characters fit this role of an intellectual girl in young adult fiction, and how it allows for a break in stereotypical gender roles. And I use that in A Wrinkle in Time. But so it's just interesting that part of those films doesn't pass, but the books do. So.
Right. Well, not everything got into the movies.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is weird about this test is that it just says talk about a man. It doesn't say talk about a relationship with a man. It says talk about a man. So something like The Blind Side, where this is like a powerhouse mom who's fighting for her son. If it were a daughter, it would have passed. She's not talking about her love life. She's talking about her son.
Right.
Which is a very different thing, I think. Also, like movies that would have something like lawyers discussing a case. If the two female lawyers are discussing a plaintiff who's a male, it wouldn't pass. But they're not talking about a relationship. They're talking about their job. So it's just male in general, and I think that's too limiting.
I agree with you, and I think it kind of goes back to one of our earlier podcasts about gender stereotypes. Why wouldn't a woman pass? Why wouldn't a film pass if a woman was speaking to a man about something completely not romantic?
Yeah, so if she's talking to a man or. Yeah,
because then is this test then inspiring a wave of it's almost like bringing on a different gender stereotype. So do we have to be talking to women, or can we talk to men as equals?
I feel like we should be able to talk to men.
Right.
So, I mean, it would have to have, like, let's say our reversion of this test would have, you need at least 2 characters with names. Sure, let's keep that one.
That one.
But they have to talk about something other than a man.
Right.
Not necessarily to each other.
Right. And
I agree if the only purpose of a girl in a movie is to be like, oh my god, my boyfriend. Okay, she's not an example of a strong woman. But if she's talking to a man about all this awesome stuff, like, why does a man not count? Why is a man less important?
Because, I mean, you think about the dynamic friendship between Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
Yeah. So anything Hermione says to Harry and Ron, that doesn't count?
Yeah. And Hermione and Harry are best friends throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, they're not romantic.
And it's like, so they can't talk about defeating a Dark Lord? Why? So
it is a limiting test. But that's the Bechdel test.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the main one that people are more familiar with. I also found 2 more similar types of tests in my research, which I think are very interesting for finding movies that include other minority groups.
Excellent.
So I also found something called the DuVernay Test, and it's named for Ava DuVernay, who is the director. And it is pretty much the Bechdel test, but for people of color. And so their standard is almost exactly the same. There needs to be 2 named people of color. They need to talk about something besides race.
Okay.
So they can't be like, oh, you white people, you know, it can't be that, or like, here's what it's like to be growing up in this culture. Like, they need to just be characters, and that needs to not be the focus. So there was the least amount of info on this one of all the tests that I found. That was all I could find on it. I think it's a newer one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was harder to find things that passed and failed, but I was able to find a few that passed that are also great movies. All of them are great movies.
Come on me. What have we got?
Sister Act.
Excellent.
Dreamgirls.
Mm-hmm.
Pursuit of Happiness.
Yep.
Color Purple.
Mm-hmm.
Rent. And
Yep.
A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah, Wrinkle in Time. My other book.
So those are the ones that I found that passed this test. One thing I noticed about this, though, is that it seemed very focused on African American only.
Mm-hmm.
And it's claiming it's people of color, but that includes more groups than African American.
Which means that the newest Star Wars film, The Last Jedi, would pass.
Yeah.
As would Set It Up on Netflix.
Mm.
And I think Set It Up passes all 3. Once we go into, you'll describe the third one.
The third one, yeah. I haven't seen Set It Up yet, and it's on my list of things to watch.
Hilarious.
I need to watch it. I will watch it soon and get back to you about it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I think those are very focused on just African American. But, you know, I think that movies have made an attempt in recent years to include different ethnicities. And it goes back as far as one of the original, it wasn't even a movie, it was really a series that kind of broke open the, like, let's put people gender blind, color blind in positions of power. That seemed to have affected a lot of this was actually the original Star Trek series. Because it had people of different races in positions of power. It had a black woman in a position of power. So that was one of the ones, and that was a long time ago, that kind of broke open, oh, we can actually just colorblind cast.
Right.
Unless it has specifically to do with you have to look a particular way because of the character. But generally, I think movies are doing a better job with this.
In our teenage years and early college, Veronica Mars did a good job of that. And currently, one that passes all the tests, and again, it's a TV show, not a film, but Timeless passes all these tests. And they do it seamlessly.
Well, TV shows overall are much more likely to pass the tests. I don't know if it's because TV is more forward-thinking than the movie industry right now, or because they have more time.
They have more time to have plots and characters.
So they can have more characters that all have interesting things to say. But maybe not every single episode would pass them all.
Right.
So you'll end up with more, you're going to have more than 2 women who talk to each other. You're going to have, hopefully, you're going to have people of color at some point, or it's just not realistic. You're going to have different groups of people. So TV shows generally, I wasn't even counting TV shows, although I know I mentioned one, but just because it kind of broke open the boundaries for movies and TV shows at that time period.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how easily a lot of my favorite TV shows pass this, like pass all 3 tests.
Yeah, and we will talk to you about the third one in just a moment.
Yeah.
So the first 2 that we covered, Bechdel Test, DuVernay Test. I don't know, thoughts about it? Is the DuVernay Test any better? Or is it still not as inclusive?
I mean, I think that, like you mentioned before, that people are starting to do a better job, but a lot of the films that you mentioned focus on Black Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not that is a bad thing at all. It's wonderful, and it's a hugely important part of our history. But seeing more minority groups represented in films, I think, is something that needs to happen no matter what. Just because you don't walk down the street and just see white Anglo-Saxon Americans. It's just not, why would you make your films like that?
Right.
So.
And I think they are doing a better job with that. The other thing that I feel like it's hard to make it a direct parallel between like passing the Bechdel test and passing the DuVernay test, because women are like 51% of the population.
Right.
So it's a higher amount. Like, this seems to be focused on Black Americans. That's 12%. Although if it included all people of color, the percentage would go way up. Right. And I think it should. I think it, in theory, does. Because it's just listed as people of color, but all the examples that they gave are primarily with African Americans.
Right.
So, just something to think about. But I think it's interesting that people are thinking about these things and focusing on them. So the third test is called the Vitto Russo Test. And this is the test that is about inclusion of the LGBT community. So their rules are a bit different than the other 2. The other 2 are almost identical rules. It just swaps out a word or 2.
Mm-hmm.
Their rules are a little bit different. It needs to have at least one character, not 2, 1, who is identifiably in the LGBT community.
Okay.
So I guess it has to be confirmed or alluded to strongly enough.
Mm-hmm.
So not just from a stereotype, like, well, that guy said this and that's something that's in the gay culture. It has to actually be identifiably they're a member of that community.
Mm-hmm.
So that's rule number 1. One character who's identifiably LGBT. Number 2, they need to have discernible character traits outside of that identification. So they can't be the archetype of the sassy gay friend and they're just in one scene as the sassy gay friend and that's it.
Right.
They have to have some kind of discernible character trait that you could, if you were listing out their character traits, the number 1 trait wouldn't be gay or trans or whatever that character is.
Mm.
And number 3, they must affect the plot in some way.
Okay.
So they don't have to be the main character, but something that they do or say has to have some impact on the plot. Like, the plot wouldn't work the same if you took that character out. Now, I mean, not necessarily that they have to be gay or a member of this community for it to work. But if that character didn't exist, there'd be a hole in the plot and you'd have to fix something.
See, those rules are so much better.
Well, I think this is...
Go LGBTQ community.
They wrote it more recently, and I like those rules. So, at least one character, discernible character traits outside of their identification, and affect the plot.
Set it up. That too.
Yeah. I really like set it up. This one I found a lot more that passed. There was more information on this because I think the LGBT community did a better job of writing this than... I'm not sure who wrote the other one, but I feel like this group did a better job. It was part of like GLAAD.
Okay.
Where I found all this information. It did note in that article that movies lag behind TV quite a bit and TV shows are much more likely to pass. It did also note that 83% of the movies that pass this feature only gay men.
Ooh, yeah.
So there's a bias even within this group. So of any movie that would pass the Vitto Russo test, most of them they pass because of the presence of a gay man or gay men, but not any other member of the LGBT community. Not all the time, but it's a high percentage. So
Right.
that's something to think about too.
Interesting.
So I have a list of things that pass. Some are great movies, some are silly, but these are things that pass. All right. Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Love.
Great. Unfinished Business, which I have not seen, but it was listed in the article.
I have not seen that either.
Magic Mike XXL. Ted 2. Rent.
Yeah.
Mean Girls.
Yeah.
Clueless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Star Trek Beyond.
Mm-hmm.
The Birdcage, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
Cruel Intentions.
Yeah.
And then this one, I see that there might be some debate on, but they had Legally Blonde on here as well. And the presence of that gay character is important to the plot, but I feel like the fact that he is gay is so important. So I don't know if he's an archetype or not. So that one is a little bit tricky for me. That could go either way.
Yeah.
He does have character traits other than being gay, but I feel like that's his primary character trait. And his purpose in the movie wouldn't work if he wasn't gay.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. TV shows are so much better at this. I'm like, even when you said, like, you mentioned that most of the films focus on gay men. Mm-hmm. I just 3 TV shows, Pretty Little Liars, Buffy, and Timeless, and it's women.
Grey's Anatomy.
Yep.
So anyway, that is what I have to say about the Vitto Russo test.
Interesting. I like how they set it up much better.
Yeah. What do you think would be better versions of these tests? Like if we could rewrite all the tests for actual good measures of, did they include a representative of this group? And keep in mind that even if they don't pass any of these tests, it doesn't make it a bad movie. Some of these movies are great.
I mean, I hope one day that these tests won't be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
That filmmakers just kind of put all these types of characters in films because they're real people. Mm-hmm. So ideally, I'd love that when my children grow up, they will watch my children who will appear someday.
Someday they'll appear out of thin air.
My future children. I hope that they live in a cinematic world where these tests aren't necessary to keep bringing up again and again. So I wanted to...
I agree.
But I think that if we kind of tweak the first 2 tests to more resemble the last one.
So follow those rules. So at least one character who is that group, discernible character traits outside of that identification and affects the plot.
Right. Because then it could be like, if say it's a female character, there's at least one female character that it's more than just her being a girl or the girlfriend. Maybe she's a lawyer or a doctor or, and
for that one, I feel like for the Bechdel test, I want to keep 2 just because of the sizes of these minorities. There are more women than any other minority.
No, of course, the more women you can put in a film, you go.
Mm-hmm. So like it should have 2 women, but they don't necessarily have to be in the same room and talk to each other. They can talk to men.
No, because I mean, even the original trilogy, Star Wars, has more than one woman. They don't have a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They don't talk, or they're in the same room, but they don't speak directly to one another. But
and it's mostly like Leia's the important one,
right? But I think it's also something that we should keep in mind. And I know that I'm going off topic. I'm a circular talker. Everybody runs in the family, but I think we should also keep in mind when a lot of these films were made, and that for the time period they were made in, they were a lot more progressive than other films made during that period. The fact
and there are still films
Yeah.
made that pass and don't pass in like today's age. But you're right. With a lot of the movies that we mentioned, they are a little older.
Right. Like even if you take the film version of To Kill a Mockingbird, if you look at when that book was written, when Harper Lee wrote the book, that was still kind of a taboo subject in the South. So for when it was written and adapted, they did a really good job of portraying a specific theme, plot, set of characters that were bringing home something that they thought was important to tell. So I think that's important to know too.
Definitely.
And Hunger Games passes, by the way. We're past the first two.
Yeah, because nobody's officially, I mean, you could argue that maybe Caesar Flickerman, but they never actually say that.
Correct. Yeah, they never actually say it.
Like, I feel like he seems like a gay man to me, but maybe not.
Mm-hmm. I'll turn the question to you. What would you like to see as edits to these tests that you think would make them better?
Well, I agree that the Vitto Russo test is the best of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, the Bechdel test, for when it came out, you have to remember this test also was from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was part of that other feminism wave.
Mm-hmm.
It's not modern feminism. And so it was very rigid about any man at all. Like, you can't talk about any man at all. If you want to keep the talking about a man thing, I feel like it should be edited to a relationship with a man.
Or in the context of a relationship.
Right. So if like girls exist in the movie just to talk about like, oh, well, my boyfriend did this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That I agree with. That's not them having their own minds and agency. But if the man that they're talking about in the situation is a family member, or is a friend, or a teacher, or a doctor, or a patient, or a lawyer, it's just because they're male, that's not them not talking about something else. Just because the person connected to it is a male.
Right.
So I think that needs to be discerned a little more. And I'm on the fence about whether they have to talk to each other or not, because of that rule, things like Lord of the Rings with powerhouse women don't pass. And I mean, it's just, I guess, the quantity of women that I see why they're saying talking to each other. But on the other hand, it doesn't work for every movie. And you don't typically see that the other way. You don't typically see many movies where two men don't talk to each other.
But what if you're in a situation like The Help, or like a film like Titanic, where are portraying a historically accurate event, and maybe women of that time didn't talk to each other about other things other than certain societal things. So what do you do with films that are portraying a particular type of society or history where women might not necessarily have talked about anything else?
That's a tough question. I think that perhaps in that kind of situation, there needs to be like a subset of rules for historical fiction.
Yeah, I agree. Because, you hear about, for example, I know Meet Me in St. Louis does pass because they have the sisters talking about, things like moving away, the World's Fair and everything. But in a similar historic context, say they had set the film not in a family house, but out in society, just like on St. Louis at that time period, then a lot of what the women would have been doing, they would have been talking to each other, but a lot of it would have been about marriage and marriage prospects, or men in some capacity. So what do you do with that?
Right.
And I'm not saying that women back in time did not discuss things other than men. Obviously, I'm not saying that.
But in a social setting.
In a social setting, that would be what would have been portrayed in novels. So
right. No, I agree with that. And you could also argue with something like The Help. Yes, the women, for the Bechdel test, sure. It passes the Bechdel test with flying colors. But what about the DuVernay test? There are more than one person of color who talk to each other, but is everything they talk about related to their race because of the nature of it? I mean, yes and no.
Yeah, yes and no, but it's
about it. But that's the rule of the worlds that they're put in. That's not them being just an archetype of that.
Right.
That's the world that they're put in, and that's not. They're strong characters. I don't think that because it has to do with that society that it shouldn't pass exactly.
Exactly, because it doesn't make it any less of a film or any less powerful, but because it's set in a historic context, that's what was being discussed. Like, the whole driving force behind that film is this young woman who wants to tell this story, and it's about the injustices that she sees and are seen by the Black American community. But no,
right, but like the movie is about race. So them talking about race is not them being silly.
Right. Exactly.
Like I can see if it was a modern day movie and you had two Black characters, for example. It could be any color, but just I keep seeing in the examples that more so. And all they talked about was like how the white people are so different.
Right.
If that was not the point of the movie. Like if you don't give them a character arc other than that, then that's a problem. But in that setting, it's a different world.
Right.
So I think that I feel like the biggest takeaway of this is we can't actually depend on these tests to tell us what movies show good examples and which ones don't. And I think we need to decide for ourselves what movies we like that we think are good examples and which ones we don't. Like I said about the surprise passes and fails. I mean, you know, Anchorman passes the Bechdel test, but it's very like welcome to the pants party. It's very sexist and, you know, objectifying women.
And American Pie?
American Pie passes, but then like Lord of the Rings doesn't pass, and it has Galadriel and Arwen and Eowyn, and they're all like badass women. So I don't think that passing the Bechdel test or the DuVernay test or the Vitto Russo test makes something a good movie or not a good movie. The other thing I think we have to keep in mind about the other two, and I said this before, is just the percentages. So I guess I understand people being more upset if women are not represented at all because there are more women.
It's just if people think of it almost as a siphon. Easily, you know, say like humankind, and then we can split people into men and women, regardless of whether you were born a man or a woman, or if you or if that is who you
just what you are. Yeah,
just men and women. It's very easy to just split those two. So and of course there can be Black men, Black women, Asian American men, Asian American women, you know, and gay men, lesbian women, trans, everything. So they all can fall under those two categories of men and women, which is Bechdel test almost hits people harder, I think, because women
it includes some of the others. Yeah,
so many other things. When you say women, it's like you include a bunch of other things too.
Yeah,
things. My vocabulary tonight.
Types of people. I don't know. I feel like we're both a little silly and tired tonight. It's the wine.
I'm drinking water now.
I have both. I have wine and water.
So, but no, you're right. It's more upsetting to see that because if a film, for example, doesn't have that amount of women in it, then you're then taking out 50% of all the other things that we talked about.
That you could possibly have, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think women are actually a little more than 50%, if I'm correct. I feel like I heard it was like 51.
Let's see.
So, you know, even that, it's interesting that women are considered a minority. Because technically, women are not a minority of anything.
They have 2010. We actually were at 50.8 and they were at 49.2, but now the male population slightly outnumbers the female population.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The population grew by 9.9 and the female population dropped by 9.9.
Okay. So we're just about even.
We're just about even now. Oh, no. Now we're tied with the Marlins. Sorry. I just...
It's okay. You can check the game later.
Listeners, when I Google, the first thing that pops up is I get Red Sox and Patriots and Twins notifications. So
there you go.
Anyway,
did we have anything else on this stuff, or are we just rambling?
Just that, to reiterate what you said, Chelsea, that these tests should not be a clear, identifier of good film versus bad film, but it's important that they exist so that people are at least aware of how there's been a shift in just how our culture has treated certain individuals and groups of people in society and in film and in books and in television series. So, like we said before, you can obviously always make excuses for old films when people weren't as open-minded or willing to accept a lot of different groups of individuals. And we need to always watch those films with the mindset and the brain of individuals who were making them then. Mm-hmm. But, so basically I'm saying that these are wonderful tests and it's really important things to think about, and we should never stop thinking about these things. But do they determine whether a film is good or bad? No.
I think it's interesting, though, and it's important that I think their biggest purpose is to make filmmakers aware.
Right.
Not necessarily to tell us, watch this movie, don't watch this movie, but to make filmmakers aware and writers aware of what kind of characters are you portraying.
Right.
I have to tell you something, though. This show here, our show, passes the Bechdel test, obviously, because we are women who talk to each other all the time. Yeah. And we very rarely talk about men, if at all, on the podcast. Just maybe in the concept of a relationship, but not specific men. We had an LGBT episode. So we passed the Vitto Russo test. And the DuVernay test. We had one African-American guest. We should do better on that one. Okay, that's our next job.
Yeah, we gotta do better.
We had one, though, and who was also LGBT, so she counted for two things, and she's amazing.
She is. She's a wonderful human being.
And she's so smart and so much fun. So she's like a mega person. She counts for a lot.
Counts for all three. Check.
But pretty much, I mean, we've had... The test says you need two people of color, but we've had one who was a very strong character, even though she's not a character, she's a person.
So, as always, to everybody listening, if there's any topic that you would like us to discuss, please send us a message on any of our social media channels, or there's an email address through the website, correct?
The email address is sapiofilespodcast@gmail.com, and is not through the website, but you can comment on the website.
Oh, excellent. And if you have any questions or comments on a topic we've already discussed, even if you disagree with us, please post those. Although, keep in mind that this isn't an area for trolls. We hate the trolls. Don't be a Lord of the Rings troll. Nobody likes them. But if you do have something that is
If you like the dwarves.
We do like the dwarves. We love the dwarves. But, and the elves. And the hobbits. But, not the trolls.
And the long-lived men.
Yes. But in any case, thanks for listening.
Thank you. We'll see you guys next week.
Yes, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Topic to be discussed.
See you then.
Here.
Thanks for joining us again this week on the Sapio Files. As always, any questions, comments, concerns, or topic ideas can be sent to sapiofilespodcast@gmail.com, posted on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, or left in a comment on any app that you use to listen to our podcast. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you back next time. Stay curious, everyone.